start shortly.
Order, and welcome to today's session of the Transport Select Committee, where we welcome back the Minister. Minister, would you like to introduce yourself and your team, please?
Thank you, Chair. My name is Hugh Merriman. I'm the Rail Minister. I'll leave Nick and Conrad to introduce themselves.
So, Conrad Bailey, the Director General for Rail Strategy and Services in the Department for Transport.
Thank you.
And Nick Bisson, Director for Northern Powerhouse Rail and the Integrated Rail Plan.
Thank you. We're very grateful to the three of you for your time this morning and answering our questions. My colleagues and I will want to cover quite a wide range of issues affecting our railways today in a minute, but I'd like to open up by looking ahead. Last week, the government published its draft rail reform bill. This committee will be conducting its pre-legislative scrutiny, and we have also issued today our call for evidence from stakeholders in the industry. In the week that's passed since its publication, what have you sensed has been the reaction of the industry and its stakeholders, and has that surprised you in any way?
Well, firstly, can I say thank you to you and the committee for taking on the role of the pre-legislative scrutiny body. I was particularly keen that it was this committee. It's cross-party, it's got the expertise in this field, and it's always been a champion for rail reform. In terms of the response, and as you say, we published the draft bill, had a private session with you and the committee to go through the content of the bill and what was within scope. And then we also published our consultation response as well for the 25 areas that were sort of covered in terms of matters posed. I think the response has been positive. Of course, people want to know when the legislation will be put down, but of course that depends on how well the scrutiny is dealt with and whether there is a conclusion in terms of the content of the bill, which I very much hope there will be. I think the point I've tried to raise is that it's one of those classic sort of bills where there aren't that many clauses because it largely just transfers the power to award contracts from the Secretary of State to the new body, so GBR. And of course there's always a temptation for it to become a shopping list of everyone's requests. And I think the message I would have to industry is that if we want to make sure we can get the reform delivered, if we end up overloading with ideas, then that will actually make the reform harder to deliver. And whilst there may be differing views on what reform should look like, I've always found a consensus that if we don't have reform, then the railway is going to get even more challenging to deliver. So I think my message to all would be, see the legislation as the ability to deliver the rail reform, and then the actual changes, which we discussed as a whole last week, will actually derive from that legislation, from that reform. And those are changes that the transition team are working on right now, but there'll be greater changes once the reform's through.
You've rightly indicated that there are a number of reforms that can be made without legislation. Legislation is, of course, important. But could you, if you were back in front of us in, say, 6 or 8 months' time, what type of reform could the industry and passengers see that doesn't require the legislation?
So the reform around fares, ticketing and simplification is a good example where actually the changes have started, but there's a lot more that can be done, and that doesn't require the legislation to be able to do that. Open access is another area that we champion as a department, and we've got 6 applications currently in the pipeline, which the Office of Rail and Road will make determinations on. In order to actually free up more routes, make it more attractive for bidders, that again doesn't require legislation to do that. What we do need, though, is an integrated railway where track and train is integrated, and the decision making is made not by ministers on the operational part of the railway, but by the railway itself. That can only happen once this committee has done its work, once that legislation has been passed.
Thank you. And just for the record, this committee will do a thorough job, but we want to do it at pace so that the reforms can start to happen as soon as possible.
But and on that, Chairman, we welcome the pace, but also you demonstrated that, because only a week after the publication, the terms of reference are out there for the industry, other bodies to actually give their views. So I wanted to say thank you for the pace that you're already working to.
Thank you. You mentioned open access, and that very neatly brings me on to my colleague Jack, who wants to ask some questions on that.
Thank you, Chair. As Chair said, you've mentioned open access, and you've been, Minister, very supportive of increasing open access. Obviously, as you've mentioned, you've commissioned Network Rail and the OR to look into this further. Could you outline what are going to be the next steps to see some of those open access operators coming onto the railway?
Yes, and so back in November, myself and Conrad and the industry, which included Network Rail, all of those that currently operate open access provision, plus new entrants to the market that we're trying to encourage, got together on a round table and discussed what we could all do to actually make the process more attractive. Part of that was the timelines that Network Rail and the Office of Rail and Road operate to in order for bids to be processed, and there was a request to set some timelines so that the bidders actually know how long the process is going to take, and those entities are then held to those timescales. That draft has now been put together between the bodies, and we're just reviewing that internally so that can be released. So again, we know the longer the process, the less likely we are to see entrants take part in it. And the other part is looking at the spare routes that are available and that are not being used. And so we're going through an exercise. We've asked the private train operators, the TOCs, to do this exercise. The exercise has already been completed for the 4 operators within the department's control, the DOL operators, so that effectively those routes can be put back and then opened up to the market. And that will be a process where we want to make sure that is known, so that bidders can look and find what's attractive for them.
Mm-hmm. Open access has been more successful in getting passengers back on to our railway, and obviously, as you said, we've got to try and use some of that spare capacity, but in many parts of the network, West Coast for example, we haven't got that spare capacity. Have you thought about transferring, for example, cross-country over to being an open access instead?
So what we're looking to do more is actually try and create new routes that open access bidders can then look at. So let me give you an example. There's been a decision to withdraw a route that goes to Shrewsbury and up to North Wales. Because there are better options available, and it's quite a costly route which loses money. But B, there's also a bid that's in play from an open access provider that would look to do something new. So effectively, we can try and look at our existing services and work out what's not working well at the moment, and can it be replaced by an open access bid. But we're not looking to transfer train operations over. Not least, there are contracts in place. We wouldn't be able to do that. Of course, there could always be the option once a contract expires. None of our contracts are due to expire, certainly this year. But it's more a question of trying to open up new routes and get more passengers onto the network rather than transferring existing over. Conrad, I don't know if you wanted to.
So the only thing I was going to add is that the review of paths that can be opened up to open access operators also potentially benefits the freight market, obviously, and I know both the Minister and I, we're finding there is a lot of interest out there from people interested in, the opportunities to run more open access.
I mean, the reason I mentioned cross-country is because those services have sort of been starved of investment. The rolling stock is not really fit for purpose. So would this not be an opportunity, if that were transferred to open access, to get more investment into that part of the network?
Well, again, we have seen one interest from an open access provider, but it would actually require, their bid was them taking over someone else's rolling stock as well that was prevailing for that entity. We do expect the open access operators to provide their own stock. The cross-country rolling stock is an issue. It's due for a full refurb, and we've got, I can't remember the date, but we're looking to put out to market the tender for new rolling stock for cross-country as well.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairman. Just very quickly, and it's refreshing, obviously, Minister, having sat in where we are, that you want to work together, and not trying to be negative at all, but are there things that aren't included that you would have liked to have included? So really I'm asking that so we don't go down any sidings and get shunted off and start chasing places we can't go. So is there anything that's not included that you would have liked to have seen included that maybe might happen in the future?
No, genuinely there's not, because I think, for me, my drive, as it is for you as a committee, is to try and get through this at pace and then use the earliest opportunity, once it's been through its cross-party scrutiny, to demonstrate that it's ready for legislation. And the more that's put in, the harder that would be. So, for example, if you were to put workforce reform in, and I know there are arguments to say that the only way you will deliver workforce reform, if you can't agree it with the unions, is to legislate. But to do that would make it a much harder job to then get the legislation through at pace. And then it means we can't get the rail reform and all the things that I know that you, Mr. McCartney, want to see for the benefit of the passenger, then delivered. So it's a sort of question of choices, really. I'd rather go for the slimmed approach, get the reform delivered, and then deliver that reform at pace, than sort of try and for me to be too greedy with a legislative
A pragmatic view, Minister. Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. Back to you.
Thank you. Turning now to the reliability of rail services, turn to Greg.
Thank you, Chairman. Morning, Minister and gentlemen. The ORR has reported a 23% rise in passenger rail service complaints in the year ending March 23. Why do you think that is, and what's the department doing with the TOCs to improve customer experience and reliability across the rail network?
So we've been clear that the passenger performance is not acceptable. The delays, the cancellations have been very challenging. With that, we look at Network Rail's performance. We also look at the train operators' performance as well. And we also look to industrial action, which of course has had a massive impact for the period you mentioned and actually continuing. What we have seen, so if we looked at the ORR's latest review for the month, sort of January into February, then we saw the cancellations reduce from down to 3.6%. They had actually been on a steady increase, I'm sorry to say, from summer going all the way up to a high going from December to January, where they were just, I think, around about 5.5%. So that's welcome. That's one of the lowest for a year. So that is a better rate. What we also have to address is the challenging weather that we've experienced over winter. I mention that because we've had, I think, 10 named storms. It's been absolutely horrendous for the railway. And actually, I try and be positive, and actually I look at how well the railway and the staff have actually done in those circumstances, because it has been absolutely horrendous with the wind and the rain. But it is a challenge for passengers. I totally recognise that over the year. Your service, for example, in Chiltern, has got a lot busier, which is successful. But we now have issues in terms of rolling stock, age, etc. as well. So our challenge is trying to find that investment at the same time as we justify putting almost £45 billion of taxpayers' subsidy into rail services, because we're only 80% of our finances, and that's £1,500 for every household. So trying to balance the investment with the taxpayers' need to keep their own household bills down is a constant challenge, and I think that also therefore has an impact on the performance of the railway.
Thank you for that. Funny you should mention Chiltern. It's like you'd preempted where I was going to go with that afterwards. So yes, customers of Chiltern in particular, and I should preface this by my focus will be on Chiltern and other colleagues, and then come in later around Avanti and so on. Chiltern used to be the gold standard. Now the mere glance at the customers of Chiltern Railway's Twitter account paints a horrid picture of daily stories of people not even being able to get on trains, of massive overcrowding, looking like the tube at rush hour rather than a mainline rail service. Part of that is they've got the oldest rolling stock of any operator on the network. It's constantly in and out of the repair shops, and that's why they end up having to run shorter trains. There are other trains literally sitting, going a little bit musty in sidings that Chiltern could operate. How can we speed up the process of getting those in the short term, before Chiltern has full fleet renewal as their 2030 plan sets out, those trains that other operators are not using onto Chiltern?
So I thought this may come up, Mr. Smith, because you are a champion of the railways and particularly Chiltern and your constituents. I'll ask Conrad to talk a bit about the rolling stock options. I have myself been pushing for the 5 units that have come off Trans-Pennine Express, and I've been working with Conrad and his team to try and get those put on. I'll leave Conrad to talk about what the sort of longer-term future is in terms of new rolling stock. I know that we hear from those passengers who are impacted, and rightly so. What I would say is that Chiltern's performance level is just short of 90% in terms of their delivery versus their benchmark of 87%. So they are performing well, but there are challenges with regards to that rolling stock. Conrad, do you want to touch on the rolling stock?
Maybe just add a couple of points. So we saw a procurement notice, a contract notice released to the Roscoe market, so the rolling stock market, in December 23, with a view to seeking replacement of those trains. We're taking that through our governance at the moment within the department, and our expectation is that we should see a contract award to introduce new trains into service next year. So very much trying to move that quickly. We're conscious that the timelines are quite pressing here because the Chiltern trains actually go off. Some of them go off lease next March. So we're very much working with them on that. In the meantime, we're also looking at what we can do around service levels to relieve overcrowding and those sorts of things. Working with Chiltern, particularly at peak times in the midweek.
So I'm grateful for that, but to get the customer experience back up to where Chiltern customers, particularly on the main line, but the Aylesbury branch is equally affected, back to where they expect it to be, back to a rush hour train leaving Hadnam and Tame Parkway or Princes Risborough, to pick 2 random stations that may be in my constituency, where people are being left on the platform. They're physically unable to get on the train. That's not good performance, and given the sort of lead times of driver training on new fleet coming in, you've talked about a governance process. What is that? Is it entirely within the DFT? Does it involve Treasury sign-off? How long will that governance process take so that my constituents and other Chiltern users that are paying, times 50 quid return in order to stand with their face pressed into somebody else's armpit, if they can get on the train at all, can actually have a service that gets them up to Birmingham or down to London in a pleasant and comfortable way for their money?
So the real issue here is not our governance process, which will need to be goes through DFT ministers, but also the Treasury. But it's actually the pace of the procurement process and making sure that we work with Chiltern and the Roscoes that they move that as quickly as possible. At that point, I think our governance won't be the thing that drives the timelines here. It will be going through a proper procurement process as quickly as we can. And as I said, very much a recognition that time is against us here. In the meantime, the question I think is what can be done in some cases to mitigate that crowding, because clearly it's not good for anyone. And that's where, as I say, we are working with Chiltern to look at whether there are any additional services they can introduce in some areas to help relieve that crowding. It will be a mitigation, it won't be a solution, but we hope that will.
Well, Chiltern do have multiple requests in. There's one about bringing their bigger diesel loco sets back into service, 2 sets of which currently aren't. But I want to come back to this point that yes, they've got long-term fleet renewal plans, they've got a big 2030 plan, that's fantastic, that's great, but it doesn't solve the February 2024 crisis, and I don't use the word crisis lightly. It really is that bad on some Chiltern routes. When there are, as I mentioned earlier, either the TPE surplus sets, and I believe there are others out there that aren't ex-TPE. Yes, I understand the need for governance, I understand the need for proper procurement, but this isn't long-term, this is short-term. Trains that are sitting in England, unused right now, that could just be transferred to Chiltern or other operators that are struggling. Surely there is a way to cut down the process for that short term, just get some more trains on the tracks and operating as soon as humanly possible, as soon as the drivers and the crews can be trained to use them.
So we're very much trying to move this procurement forward as quickly as we can. It has to be in compliance with the utility contracts regulation, which does fix some of the timescales. But as I say, we're very much aiming to do this not with a view to 2030. This is with a view to 2025. I still accept, as you've made clear, that doesn't solve the problem this week, next month, and the solutions in that space, to the extent they're available, will be in terms of looking at the timetable and the services that are being run, and if there's anything we can do in June 2024.
Yeah, I'm committed to finding a solution to this. We want to encourage more people to use the railways where passenger numbers are growing. We want to encourage that. So I am actively looking at what the options are across the railway to be able to provide more resilience to Chiltern. I can give you that assurance. I will keep you posted on that front, and if I find difficulties, I'll of course let you know.
I appreciate that. Just to my point about who the players are within government on this, is the Treasury a blocker? So if the DfT signs something off, are we then in a doom loop with the Treasury, or is that a straightforward process?
I wouldn't call it a doom loop. There is a process. It does. If we are looking at anything that alters costs, then that means that the Treasury needs to be involved in that conversation as well. But we work very positively with the Treasury in terms of getting that sign off, and not just at the end of the process, but as we go along as well. I'll ensure that you are aware if there are any bumps in the road in terms of internal sign off. I can assure you of that.
Thank you.
Sarah, if we could turn to you next.
Minister, what assessment has been made of the recent performance of Avanti West Coast?
Well, I have had conversations with the team at Avanti about performance. It deteriorated over Christmas, and to that point I wanted to know what was going on, what the plan was. So I met with the Managing Director of Avanti in Parliament, and they took me through the sort of plan for the year. I am sort of concerned about the sort of comparisons between LNER and Avanti, which is a curious one, Ms Brickcliffe, because we've effectively got the same staff ratio on LNER as we have for ASLEF, about 2.5 drivers per shift on both. Neither have the opportunity to take advantage of rest day working. It's not operational on either railway. And also the sickness rates at about 6 to 8% of drivers is about the same as well, yet the performance isn't. And if you were able to, if I could indulge you, then I could actually just explain why that is, because I think it actually demonstrates why there are challenges with Avanti that I've long wanted to sort of put out there so that people could really understand what the challenges are. So if that's okay, can I just give you 3 examples of why it doesn't actually work? So I've just given you the sort of relative positions of both. Let me give you 3 examples. On LNER, there's the concept of a driver manager. So LNER has 30 drivers that are managers, but they have competency to drive, and they're able to drive on LNER trains wherever the sort of driver resources have been fully utilised. That basically means they can deliver 100 to 150 shifts every month. That saves 250 to 300 cancellations every month. So it's a sort of great requirement, a great bandwidth. Now, Avanti have an agreement with ASLEF that they will not use driver managers. So whilst the driver managers are there, they can only be used if there's strikes or in an emergency. So they can't use them in the same way that LNER have. Now, if Avanti could use driver managers in the same way, then their cancellation rate, which we take has been about 4.67%, would go down to below 1%, just with the use of driver managers. I should also note that ASLEF are actually, one of the parts they've got in dispute of LNER is they don't want LNER to be using driver managers. But that will not be happening, because I've just demonstrated you get a better service when you can actually flex your workforce. That's one example. Second example is something that we call double tripping. Again, a side agreement between the unions and Avanti, which predates Avanti, is that a driver cannot do more than a return journey. So basically, once it's driven out of Euston, it can't then drive out of Euston again on the same day. Now, if we could do that, due to the way that the Avanti timetable operates, you would get about a 10 to 15% productivity gain from drivers being able to drive in the way that management feel they're best placed in terms of efficiencies. LNER doesn't have a ban against double tripping, so they can do that on LNER, and again, it makes them more efficient. And then the third thing just to bring up is, and this again happens, so you'll see problems on a Saturday, and you'll see problems over holiday time. So we had this over half term, where effectively vacation is being taken, and you might say, well, why aren't the management saying, no, we need you to spread your vacations out over the year so the passenger gets the service? So there are leave conditions on Avanti that don't apply on LNER. So if you take Edinburgh, for example, 6 drivers can be on leave on any given day. And on top of that, you have sickness, you have time off for bereavements, etc. There's only 23 drivers in Edinburgh. So effectively a quarter of the drivers can take leave on any day, and there's nothing that can be done to say, please spread it out. It's goodwill. And what that effectively means is that you've then got fewer services that can operate once all that leave is put in. And again, for Avanti, a leave request 48 to 72 hours in advance, you consider the impact of that leave being granted and then a train service being cancelled. You know, a junior doctor would have to give weeks of notice before actually having leave. And again, that's a separate agreement. So I wanted to bring that to the committee's attention because it's work that I've commissioned, and it just demonstrates that all of these side agreements, these restrictive terms and conditions, mean that management cannot put their workforce where the passenger actually needs them. And if Avanti could do that, then there are a lot of retirements going on. It could actually cope with 55 retirements and actually have enough drivers. But because of these restrictive terms and conditions, we need even more drivers, and we'll still then be subject to those terms and conditions and never be able to deliver a proper service unless they're reformed.
So what conversations then are being had with ASLEF to look at the double tripping and the driver managers? Is there any negotiations going on to change those conditions then?
Well, so that is at the heart of the industrial action that's been going on for some time with ASLEF, because what the government would consider a fair and reasonable pay offer has been tabled, which, as I've mentioned before, would take an average driver's salary from just shy of £60,000 to £65,000 for a 35-hour, 4-day working week. So it would be an increase in pay, no change on the hours. But what we're looking for in return for that is for a change to these restrictive practices, these side agreements, so that management can then roster their staff where the service actually requires it. And all the things I've just described would then be sort of taken out, and the LNER sort of way of working would become the Avanti way of working, and that's what we've got across the piece. But the unions won't agree to that because, of course, what I've just described means that you wouldn't need as many drivers because you're making sure the drivers are working in a more efficient manner. So I guess you don't need as many union subs. And it means that we can't get agreement from the unions. They don't consider that £5,000 pay rise to compensate them for the changes that I would like to see the industry being able to put forward.
So when you met with Avanti, I think it was in January, and discussed their recovery plan whilst this strike action is going ahead, what is their recovery plan regardless of the strike action that's taking place?
So their recovery plan includes recruiting an extra 70 drivers per year. Now, of course, we have drivers retiring, so you'll always need to make sure that there are more coming into the workplace. But they will end up recruiting more drivers than are actually needed if you could efficiently operate the workforce, sort of allow the double tripping that I just described, allow driver managers to step in and assist as and when sort of you've got that natural sort of leave spike. They can't do anything about that because those are side agreements entered into. Effectively, from a legal perspective, it almost becomes part of the terms and conditions. If you were to try and change this unilaterally, it would be very difficult from a court perspective that might view it to be what we sort of tend to term as fire and rehire, because those side agreements have become a sort of contingent part of the employment contract. So Avanti have done about as much reform as they actually can without breaching these terms and conditions that have been put in place, the side agreements, over the years, not least by Virgin when they were in play. Because effectively, time's gone by when West Coast was making a lot of money, then if there was an issue, then you could just pay your way through it or enter into a side agreement. And now those side agreements come back to bite because times are now much tougher. And that is a great frustration that I have. I would just love to see reform in the workplace so that we can pay people better, They keep the same hours that they work, but all we ask them to do is work in the sort of efficient manner that every other industry that tends to work in, apart from when it comes to driving trains.
And so how are you managing to measure that Avanti are doing everything that they possibly can? Because back in December, the Mayor of Manchester requested a review to the Secretary of State into Avanti. That didn't seem to take place. So how are you judging that they're doing everything possible to improve the service?
So every week I look at the performance of Avanti and TransPennine in particular. I look at all of the operators, including the ones that are within the control, like TPE. And the officials regularly engage with them as well. We hold them to account with regards to their performance. And what we had noticed is that their performance had got a lot better at the beginning of last year. They had been at sort of around about 13% cancellations. It got to just over 1%. It was on the back of that increased performance that the contract was extended for Avanti. And since then, we've seen challenges, particularly in the summer and at Christmas. Again, it comes down to leave, when drivers are taking leave at a particular time. And I do believe that Avanti have tried to sort of sweat the rostering, the timetabling as much as they can, but they're now down to the fact that these agreements just put them in a position where they cannot roster the staff where they're needed. And I do get frustrated when I hear mayors just saying Avanti's service is not good enough. No one wants to seem to understand what the challenges are, why this occurs. And that's why I was pleased to be able to set it out to the committee. It's important that people look at the factors for why these delays are occurring, why the cancellations are occurring. Because only when we actually get under the bonnet of this and highlight it will we be ever able to do something about it. And that's what I'd dearly love to see.
Okay, there's another concern about the staff welfare. So there was a report in The Guardian, I think again back in December, and it was an internal Avanti employee survey with over 2,000 respondents. And actually, only 3% of the staff said they felt valued at Avanti, whilst 56% said they felt unappreciated. And they were asked if they believed Avanti West Coast was committed to delivering a good service for its customers, and only 1 in 5 staff members agreed to that. So not only do we have concerns about how the performance of Avanti itself, but also that the way the staff are feeling and being treated by Avanti. And I know from travelling every week on Avanti West Coast that the staff members are fantastic, but actually the internal processes here look severely flawed with how they're treating their staff in general as well.
So you're absolutely right, and it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, this, because I travel on Avanti a lot and the staff are absolutely fantastic. I don't have any issue with any of the staff. I have an issue with the terms and conditions and these outmoded work practices that mean that we cannot have the staff working in the most efficient manner. If we did, the services would improve. There wouldn't be the delays, there wouldn't be the cancellations, which ultimately it's the frontline staff that have to face the unhappiness of the passenger, and then their value, for them, things get worse. So it's got to be within the interests of not just passenger, but staff, for us to change the way that the railway operates, so that the staff feel more valued, get happier customers, and can focus their time on the passenger experience rather than having to try and work out and explain why a train's just been cancelled, and it will be for one of the reasons I just mentioned.
Mick, you also wanted to come in on about... No, that's covered. Fabian, then.
Minister, may I challenge you on some things you said? I use LNER every single week, but I had occasion recently to use Avanti West Coast. I travelled from Wigan, I had my bicycle with me. Now, the train that I was booked on was cancelled. The next train was half an hour later. That was then cancelled, restored, and then delayed. I finally got on that train, and once I got on the train with my bike, I was told, well, this is the slow train via Birmingham New Street. If you want to get to Euston more quickly, you've got to change at Crewe. So I got off at Crewe. By this time, it was very delayed. I'm sorry, forgive this anecdote, because it's an example of what's going wrong at Avanti. And I think you're being, if I may say so, you're letting the management off the hook here, because it seemed to me that whatever the restrictive practices, which don't happen on LNER for some reason, because LNER works far better, but I accept what you say, but there's management to blame here, and I'll tell you why. I get off at Crewe, and I'm told in order to get on the fast train to London, you've got to go and rebook your bike. So I go upstairs to the ticket office, and they say, we can't rebook your bike because the train is, according to the computers, already left, even though it hasn't arrived yet. So go down back to the platform and ask the guard to put the bike in the guard's van, which I did, which seemed an absurd nonsense to me and bad management, not restrictive practices. I then get on that fast train, get to Euston about an hour and a half late, and what happens? There's nobody to unlock the guard's van because all the staff have gone. Now, whether that's to do with the unions or not, I don't know. And eventually, half an hour later, a driver in the train on the next track says, oh my God, they're useless. I wish I wasn't working for this company. Unlocks the guard's van and lets me out. Now, that's just one example. But I put to you that it's actually a combination of poor management and planning, as well as the practices that are working well at LNER and are restrictive on Avanti. You need a combination of both. Better management and obviously better staff practices too.
Yeah, Mr. Hamilton, look, forgive me, because you just said this doesn't happen on LNER, but I just spent 5 minutes saying exactly the same thing. So we're in agreement.
You're blaming the trade union movement, not
no, I'm not, again,
or ASLEF.
I think what's really important, the reason why I took this role up, is because when I was sat where you were in the committee, I could never quite understand why it was the case that we couldn't get our trains to operate. What was going on? And so the beauty of me being in this position and having been in yours is that I can now see it from both sides, and I can completely see the evidence as to why we can perform on LNER, and that was the point I was making. LNER performs better, and it doesn't have these restrictive side agreements in place that Avanti does, and I can point to examples, and did, where Avanti cannot roster their staff where they need to. So take the double tripping, for example. It may have something to do with your journey. If you could allow a train driver to go from Euston up to Birmingham or Wolverhampton, and then back, and then back, and then back, then you would actually find a much more efficient way of working. Instead, you end up with a lot of dwell time. We end up having to get our drivers off to another part via taxi so that they're not covering the same route twice. And we end up having to diagram so that you end up going Euston, Birmingham, up to Crewe, and then find your way back round to Euston. It's not the most efficient way of working. Now, I'm not saying that was the exact reason why your train was impacted, but what I am trying to give the committee evidence for is that there are matters that LNER can either do, i.e. having the driver managers, which mean you don't have the cancellation numbers that I just read out to you, which Avanti don't, therefore they have to cancel. And there are agreements in place that restrict the way that Avanti can ask their drivers to drive, where they can go, which you don't have on LNER. More worrying, though, if you do value the LNER service, is that the dispute on the 1st of March, ASLEF have specified that they want a proper agreement in place as to driver managers on LNER, i.e. they will no doubt want to restrict it in the same way that it's restricted on Avanti West Coast. And we will not have that, because those driver managers allow not just the passengers to get on the train without the high risk of it being cancelled, as can be the case on West Coast, but they're also vital for us to introduce a new timetable, which we hope to do for the end of this year, and also to be able to be involved in the design stage of the new trains, the tri-modes that are coming on. So ASLEF at the moment are refusing to involve themselves in the design stage of those trains, which means that we could end up delaying the introduction of those trains. So I don't have a personal issue with the unions. I have a personal issue and a real desire to look at these terms that restrict good passenger service and get them changed for the benefit not just of the passenger, but the staff welfare that Ms Brickcliffe raised.
But would you accept also that there is a difference in management style between Avanti and LNER? Because that double tripping and all those other restrictive practices does not explain the nonsense with the computer system or the constant changing of when the train was going to arrive at the station in Wigan on its way to Crewe. That's not, surely if you know the train's delayed, you say the train's delayed. You don't say it's delayed, it's cancelled, it's now delayed again, it's going to arrive at this time, at that time. Surely that's not explained just by the restrictive practices.
But I'm afraid to say often it is, because sometimes we're actually having to put a driver in a taxi, waiting for that driver to then be available to be able to drive because they may have already driven that trip.
What, between Manchester and Wigan? That doesn't make sense.
So this is what can often happen. So again, I don't know the specific reason. I'm giving you evidence. So as I said, the double tripping, if we allowed to to have drivers operating in the manner I just described would give you a productivity gain of 10 to 15% just on that one part alone. So of course there will be cancellations where that's not the issue, but my job is to try and reduce the cancellations where I can see the issues, and that is one of them. And in terms of management and holding to account, I do take that point. So we had very strong words when the presentation that was reported in the media came through. Both Conrad did and I did, not just with the management of Avanti, but the management of the shareholder First Group as well, because that was completely unacceptable. So yes, I have questions about culture and making sure that everyone from management down is focused on the passenger, but sometimes it's actually quite hard to incentivise people to do that when they are working with their hands bound by these restrictive side agreements that I've just described.
Will you also mention the computer systems, please?
Absolutely will. And look, trust me, Mr. Hamilton, I get incredibly cross when I don't get proper passenger information. My journey last night back home to East Sussex suffered with that as well, and in fact it did this morning when I got put on a tube that wasn't actually operating and I could have just stayed on the train. It drives me mad as a passenger when we're not given the correct information, so we can't make the right decisions that give us the best possible journey.
Mick, you wanted a quick supplementary?
Question, if I may, Chair, to the Minister. When was the last time you met with the trade unions?
Well, the last time I met was when I sat down with Mick Lynch.
When was that?
Well, it was when we were getting to a position of resolving the RMT dispute.
What date was that? It's all about Aslef now.
Oh, so with Aslef?
Yeah.
Well, I've not sat down with Mick Whelan.
Why?
Well, I haven't had a request from him to actually sit down. The negotiations are dealt with by the representatives of the Rail Delivery Group and Mick Whelan and his team. Our job is to provide a mandate.
The reason why I'm asking the question is, for the last 10 minutes we've been talking about what ASLEF doesn't do or what they do. You haven't met them. So I find that quite strange that you haven't met with the unions. So if we want to get this resolved, why aren't we sitting down with the union?
So the series of agreements I've just listed out to you are entered into between ASLEF and between, well, now Avanti having succeeded Virgin. These agreements have been in place for some years. So obviously it's for those representatives to negotiate a better place. We provide a mandate, an expectation that we want negotiators to do just that, but we don't negotiate because we don't run the train services. I want to be in a position where the passenger gets a better deal, but I'm not the negotiator, and the government isn't the negotiator, the employer is, and we're not the employer.
Yeah,
LNER or Avanti are the employer.
So the fact of the matter is, you haven't met with them?
I haven't met with Mick Whelan since he came and met with the Secretary of State and I last year.
Okay.
One other issue on the West Coast that isn't Avanti are concerns about overcrowding at Euston. And in October last year, the ORR issued Network Rail with an improvement notice. Can you give us an update as to what's happening with that?
Yes. The situation at Euston ultimately needs to be resolved by the rebuild, not just, we've obviously got the HS2 delivery, but also the actual station rebuild. It is a concern, I think, particularly with regards to platforms 8 and 11. I'm going on memory, Conrad. And there is a sort of first phase to try and address some issues around accessibility and particular sort of station crowding parts. The longer term is actually the complete renewal of the Euston station, so it looks more like King's Cross and feels more like that as an experience. Did you want to go into a bit more detail?
So the only thing I would add to that, as you say, is platforms 8 and 11 that are a particular issue, and clearly when you have performance issues, cancellations, we all know, those of us who use Euston, that it gets incredibly crowded, as well as Network Rail looking at what they can do about the station prior to any more significant changes. The other thing that is going on at the moment is Network Rail working with the operators out of Euston with a view to seeing what they can do to mitigate particular issues. So, for example, if operators call forward multiple trains to be boarded at the same time, that can cause congestion in particular areas. So there's some quite relatively small practical issues that Network Rail and the operators are working on to try and address some of those things to mitigate the situation as well.
Okay. And when are we likely to see those? I declared interest. I use Euston regularly, and it can get quite, scary. Several trains are announced, and there's I wouldn't use the word stampede, but it's not far off it at times.
So they are working. Network Rail are working on these issues with the operators. All the time they were working before the ORR came up. They have looked at things like where seating is. Can you remove seating to make the flows easier? Some of those sorts of things. So they are ongoing. I don't think there's going to suddenly be a moment where it's resolved. These are going to be mitigations, as the Minister said, until there's a longer term solution. But there is an opportunity for some mitigations there.
Okay, thank you.
And notwithstanding the work ongoing to look at the private financing of the HS2 station, what was planned alongside that in terms of the redevelopment of the existing station, the development of that continues with Network Rail, so the longer term piece remains in hand.
Okay, thank you. Mick, back to you.
Yesterday, Network Rail announced a recovery plan for the Great Western Main Line. This comes after the ORR launched an investigation into months of poor performance. Why has performance on the line been so bad?
So, Mr. Whitley, it's a combination of events, and it is undoubtedly the Western and the Wales, but particularly Western, is the most challenging region for Network Rail. There are a number of issues with it. It's being heavily used. So it's always been a long distance and a sort of suburban commuter route. But of course, now it's got the Elizabeth line, so the asset is actually getting sort of hammered with much higher usage, and it has also really struggled with some of the weather events in particular as well. Now there has been a change that's been put in by Network Rail. So Rob Cairns, who's a brilliant manager, has been brought in as the regional director. Just recently, I met with Rob just to talk about some of the things that he's seen. He's already made some changes, which not least will ensure that when there are issues, there have been a lot of issues with the overhead lines coming down during weather, but also bird strikes as well have taken them down. Then effectively the maintenance and those that would actually go from Network Rail to fix it are too far away from where the known problems are. So he's actually changed those patterns. So we've now got people in place that can get to position a lot quicker. And Network Rail are also committed to spending more on that particular route because it needs more investment. Conrad, did you want to pick up?
So I can add a few things. So the other thing that's obviously impacted on that route has actually been the severe weather. There's some particular flooding points. So Network Rail are working also with the Environment Agency to see what they can do about some of those areas around Chipping Sodbury and the like as well. And what we are often seeing is once an issue has emerged, there's then a knock-on consequence because you've got the trains in the wrong places. There have been issues because the trains have struck trees on the line, those sorts of things, and that's led to sort of fleet availability. What Network Rail announced yesterday was a £140 million Thames Valley improvement plan, so focusing particularly at the eastern end of the route, which is where the particular challenges have been. And that's really focused on trying to stabilise performance over the next 6 months and then identify some targeted improvements over the next 18 months, focusing on sort of 5 main areas that cause about 64% of the delays. So these are issues around network management, around, sadly, trespass and suicides, deaths on the line, again, are a major cause of disruption, the overhead wires, as the Minister mentioned, axle counters, and also wider sort of points and tracks issues. And very much they are looking to also learn, working with the industry, the lessons from the particular issues we had outside Paddington in December that many of us will remember. And there we're looking, I suppose, with the industry, with Network Rail, with the operators, not just at the sort of the performance of the infrastructure, but when things do go wrong, how we're making sure we're providing that kind of customer support, how trains are evacuated, how the line gets back up and running after a death. Those things that we can do perhaps a bit more quickly through better working across the sector, and that's been something that Network Rail and the Rail Delivery Group are very much leading on.
Well, for the record then, while Network Rail's plan is implemented, what reassurance can you offer users of the Great Western Main Line that service reliability will improve in the shortest possible time?
So, with regards to March, for example, there will be some impact, particularly in Devon and Cornwall, because there's signalling upgrades being delivered. So, March could see some challenges in that particular area as well. But that comes to investing in the line to make it more resilient. I think what I can offer, and I was certainly reassured, and it may be something the committee would actually want as one of your private briefings. Rob Cairns has got a very, very good track record in terms of delivery, and he doesn't stand any mucking about. He has a very clear plan of exactly what he believes that line needs in terms of the here and now, and then the longer term. And I met with him because it's a concern for me to ensure that the problems on that line are better. And one of the things I've challenged him is actually how well, and it comes to the point Conrad's making, how well the Great Western and Network Rail are working in partnership. So when I went to Paddington, I was struck by the fact that the control room is the Network Rail team. There's one person from Great Western there to make sure the drivers are in the right place, but there's the other part of Great Western, their main building is somewhere else in Paddington. And if I look at what happens on South Eastern, then you've got the Network Rail route director, and you've got the chief exec of South Eastern working completely as a team. And actually it's that integration that the rail reform is all about. So I've sort of challenged the team on Western to make sure that they work in lockstep so that there isn't that same passenger confusion, and we're spending the money in the right places for the train operator and Network Rail.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, on the 9th of February, earlier this month, the Financial Times reported that the government had lowered performance standards for Thameslink Southern Great Northern TSGN, the UK's largest rail franchise, after its operator Govia Thameslink Railway had failed on most measures of service quality in the first year of its contract. Now, the FT reported that the lower targets for the 12 months to the end of March 2024, so next month, were published on the GTR's website and showed that the company had regularly missed at least 2/3 of the 9 service quality measures in the first year of its contract, which began on the 1st of April 2022. Now, I wondered why you've recently altered the terms of Govia Thameslink Railway's contract to lower their performance standards.
So I'll start with this, and then I'll ask Conrad to come in, because my concern, as I'm sure is where you were going, is has there been anything that we have done as a department, perhaps in terms of business planning, which has meant that it's harder for GTR to be able to maintain its target because of actions we've taken, and then as a result, effectively the service gets lowered. So that was my concern. I'm assured that it's because we actually have better quality of data now that we didn't have previously. So effectively it's a sort of data scrub, which means the targets should have been at one particular level rather than the level they've been at previously. I start off in that way because I dare say you're coming at it from the same angle. I can tell you that's exactly was my concern. Conrad, perhaps.
I mean, so I think you've said it out exactly. So the service quality regime, which is the targets you're talking about, were first introduced in 2023, and every year we review those targets with the operators to make sure they're set at a level that incentivises performance. Inevitably, in the first year of setting those targets, we were learning to some extent to set them in the right place, and based on the information we had from that performance of that year, which includes sort of independent inspection, it was quite clear in some cases that we set targets at levels that we could not expect the operator to achieve, and so we tried to set them for 23-24 at a level that was deliverable, and we will absolutely hold them to account for that.
But may I just come back to you and say that some of those standards, performance standards that were lowered, included measures of train cleanliness, ticketing, staffing and customer service. So they were set far too high, were they? Or
effectively, yeah, they were set too high for the way they were.
So will passengers have a worse service now?
Passengers, I would argue, should have a better service because the GTR will be effectively incentivised to hit the measures.
So the next question, obviously, is what effect this will have on remuneration for GTR management, because, as I understand it, they're paid a fixed management fee of £8.8 million per year, and they have the chance to earn an additional performance fee of up to £22.9 million a year. Now, does that mean by lowering those incorrectly set standards at the beginning of the contract, they're now going to have more chance of earning the bonus?
No, because the standards are set on a year-on-year basis. And just to be very clear about the sort of percentages, the overall percent that most operators, the maximum they can earn from any contract is around 2%, of which about 1/3 is a fixed sort of management fee. The other 2/3 is driven by performance measures, including the service quality regime. So if they don't hit those performance measures, that money obviously shrinks back. So it's a maximum 2%ish of the value of the contract.
Normally, if you lower the performance standards, then there's a better chance of actually exceeding them and gaining the bonus.
Well,
that's as I understand.
So we will go through their results. We do it in arrears, obviously, looking at the SQR, the service quality regime performance, but also the other performance measures, and we'll set them. But they are designed to be set each year so that they are a fair and reasonable test for the operators that drives them to be a good and efficient operator, and they have to be reasonable and deliverable by them on the basis of the revenue they're earning and the budget that they have.
And you're satisfied that the passenger will get a better experience even if the standards are low?
I am satisfied that if you set a target at a level that is designed to incentivise the operator and its management, that will lead to a better set of outcomes than if there is a target that they have no hope of meeting.
We'll watch carefully with interest. Thank you very much.
Turning now to the maintenance of assets and enhancements. Graham.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to ask a couple of questions regarding maintenance and ensuring reliability on the network. The committee is aware that Network Rail's funding settlement for control period 7 is £1.2 billion less for renewals in England and Wales than the previous control period 6. Now, Network Rail have told the committee last year that they expect a decrease in asset reliability and that some difficult choices and trade-offs would be required. I'd like to ask the Minister, do you expect passengers to see reliability on the network to improve or deteriorate over control period 7?
Well, we're committed to making sure that it improves, Mr. Morris. That was a very good question. I think one of the challenges, and actually it's interesting, is when you no doubt get lobbies from local government in terms of wanting a multi-year settlement and wanting to know in advance what that settlement will be, there are drawbacks from that. So Network Rail's control period 7, its next 5-year block, is £44.1 billion. That was announced in December 2022. Obviously, the control period starts April 2024, and in that period, £1.5 billion has been eroded by inflation. So whilst it was, I believe, a 4% increase on the previous control period, it's then sort of subject to inflation because we're talking about a five-year block. And indeed, when you also take out the costs of electrification, which have to be met for those 5 years, then monies are reduced even further. But that's why when, with the Secretary of State and Department, we set the high-level output specification statement, we wanted to make sure that Network Rail were focusing on efficiencies and on technology. So let me give you 2 examples of where I have that confidence. In the first part is where Network Rail and the RMT were able to agree efficiencies on how maintenance was delivered. So instead of having 3 different sets of maintenance teams effectively going out to do one job, we now see more multitasking. I'm really pleased that the RMT and the Network Rail were able to agree that, better skilled jobs and actually more efficiency. So that will actually lead to savings. And then in addition, the technology. So when I was down at Three Bridges recently, and we talked about the weather, which is going to be one of the biggest challenges for Network Rail in terms of delivery and its funding envelope. We've now got the technology in place on embankments where you can actually see if there's movement. It connects with weather predictions as well, and it means that can be shored up before it turns into a major sort of land spill, an embankment collapse. So the technology and the use of it and the efficiency of the workforce will allow Network Rail to be able to stretch its budget, because inflation for the last year has been a challenge for it.
I wonder if I can just ask a little supplementary, and I don't know if it's opportune to ask my question about rolling stock as well. Is that? Okay.
Rolling stock in a minute.
Can I just ask about asset maintenance, if that's all right? I'm sure you're aware of the huge disruption on the East Coast Main Line because of the replacement of track and signalling that's gone on for a number of months now, and it's ongoing. It's causing massive disruption. Now, I'm not quite sure if it's compounded by the adverse weather conditions, because it seems to me there's an awful lot of flooding that's evident from just looking out of the carriage window. Is it reasonable to assume that during control period 7, all of these issues, I mean, you mentioned the embankment collapse, are going to be addressed and make the railway more reliable and sustainable in the longer term?
So, I mean, you're absolutely right with regards to weather, and that will be an increasing challenge. That was something that we made sure was, well, we didn't really need to make sure. Network Rail are very conscious of it themselves, but in the department we wanted to ensure that Network Rail were preparing for worsening weather conditions, and this winter has sort of been an example of that. In terms of the matter you referred to, that would be the sort of 4-day blockade whilst the digital signalling was being advanced. That's a £1 billion programme that will not just replace signalling on the network, but also, due to the efficiency, will allow us to operate more trains, because rather than having blocks where trains enter into, another one can't enter until the last train has entered the last block, the trains can effectively talk to each other. So that's a good example of where Network Rail are not just replacing and renewing, they're also actually looking at technology that will allow us to deliver a better and more efficient and resilient service.
We had a little discussion yesterday about the Elizabeth line, didn't we? And you know, everyone's effusive with their praise for the Crossrail and the Elizabeth line.
Yeah.
But that seems to be a fundamental issue of procurement. Actually, my colleague Jack Brereton raised it in terms of the blocking, where it isn't possible to carry out repairs to one section without taking the whole of the line. I don't know whether I've got that right, Jack, but it seems to me in control period 7 we should be addressing these issues so that we can make, so that we're not facing the East Coast Main Line not with 4 days of disruption, but with 4 months of disruption. It must be more than just the signalling, it must be the track as well.
So with regards to the 4 days, if Network Rail had just decided to do sort of like 2 days, Saturday, Sunday, and then the following Saturday and Sunday, not impacted the Monday, Tuesday, it just wouldn't have got, it would probably had to have done 3 weekends, because the value is in the time it takes to shut the railway down and then reopen it, and then actually have all that time in between. So I do recognise it was an issue. I was concerned and looked into some of the challenges that were reported actually by one of our colleagues who formerly sat on the select committee with regards to St Pancras, and whether St Pancras was able to cope with the numbers that were going up on the East Midlands, because there was a perception that people would use a replacement bus service, but people were looking instead at a train service that would get them further up, and we will look to learn the lessons from that.
Yeah.
I do recognise that did appear.
It's awful as well, I might say.
I'm sorry to you for the trouble there. What I will say is that in the years to come, once that digital programme has been delivered, you should see better reliability, better resilience, and my hope is you'll be able to see more trains on the track because we can fit more on.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Jack, yes.
Sorry,
Nick.
I was just saying, the only thing to add is, but you will also see ongoing investment in engineering work, and that has its own level of disruptive impact while it's done, because the commitments that were made in the integrated rail plan to a £3.5 billion upgrade of the East Coast still stand. And the development of that, they're not all going to be delivered in 1 year, but that programme over the next decade is in development with Network Rail.
Okay. Jack, you also wanted to
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the rail network enhancements pipeline, and as you all know, Minister, we've asked repeatedly over many years, this committee has, for when that is going to be updated. It was meant to be updated annually, it's never really been updated, and obviously we've seen some quite dramatic changes with Network North and other things that have come onto the rail network and improvement plans since that was first published. So when are we actually going to see an update of the RNEP?
So I do recognise the questions. I think I've asked them myself when I was in your position. So I do understand it. I think the challenge for us is that we've now got the Network North document, which has got a huge number of enhancements in there. It not only included some of the new railway, it also included the Restoring Your Railway, the accessibility commitments. It's a vast document, and it's not just for the North, it's Midlands and indeed the rest of the country as well. So that has sort of rather taken over as the enhancement pipeline. But I recognise we need to get clarity in terms of what does that mean to the rest of the previous sort of pipeline proposals, and that's something that I'm committed to working across government so I can get this committee that clarity. Nick, was there anything else you want to add?
I think there were two particular things I think we're working through in the aftermath of Network North. One is in the reallocation of money that was previously intended for HS2, the detailed profiling of that with Treasury colleagues, which will clearly make a difference to exactly what gets done in what years. And secondly, within Network North, there was a significant increase in the future electrification programme, and we want to give Network Rail the opportunity to shape that in a way that will work for the supply chain.
So can we expect before the end of the year we'll have an update to the RNEP?
I'll commit to give more clarity, but actually my current focus is actually making sure that working with Network Rail and all the delivery partners, we can deliver all of the enhancements that have been announced off the back of the Prime Minister's Network.
I'm sure you understand the need for some transparency around this, because at the moment a lot of this isn't very clear to the public, certainly. So, you know, I think it is very important that we see this document actually updated and published. Would you not recognise that?
I take the point. What I would gently say is that we have got billions of pounds worth of pipeline that is being, an enhancement pipeline that is being published and documented through the Network North documentation, which is going to increase Northern Powerhouse Rail by bringing in Hull, Sheffield, electrification Bradford as well. A lot of enhancements that we just didn't have before at all, and may not have even been there in terms of the top of the pipeline. So there is a pipeline out there for industry. There's a huge amount of work for industry to help us deliver that pipeline. It's just being called Network North rather than the RNEP. But I take your point that you want clarity on what's happening to RNEP, and I'll aim to give you that clarity.
Okay, thank you.
We have touched briefly on industrial action issues, but I think Zara and Gavin still want to ask some questions on that. Zara.
Yeah. Can you just update us on what the department's actually doing to resolve these disputes? Obviously, we've talked about the pay offer, but what else is happening?
Yeah, so we've seen three of the unions agree pay offers or to take the industrial action down, sort of pending further talks. So if we look at the RMT, they obviously agreed the Network Rail deal a year ago, and we talked about the efficiencies being delivered off the back of that, which is superb. What we also saw, which was very welcoming, was an agreement to a year one pay offer, which was then paid, with the year two pay offer to be subject to local discussions about reform, and those are taking place right now. In the event that reform isn't delivered, the RMT would need a local mandate for that particular area. So that takes down the national strikes. And I'm very hopeful, and I'm grateful for the work the RMT are doing, and also the train operators, that we will get that reform delivered, that second pay rise in place for the RMT members, and that will absolutely be the end of that industrial action. So that's three of the four unions. As you rightly say, the fourth union, which we do not have an agreement with, is ASLEF, and at the heart of that is the desire to deliver the reforms I talked about, which make certain train operators, but all of them actually, weaker because they're not able to roster their staff in the most efficient manner, and that's what we would like to see put in place with ASLEF in return for the pay rise that they have been offered. They have not put that forward to their members, so we remain in an impasse.
And so were you quite surprised when no work notices were issued by TOCs during the recent strikes by ASLEF?
For minimum service levels?
Yes.
So we had a series of strikes where the minimum service levels were not implemented, and then we also have two strikes coming on the 1st of March for LNER and for Northern, where they will also not be implemented. So our job as a department and government is to prepare the industry, the department, Network Rail, so that the employers are in a position to use work notices and bring in minimum service levels should they wish. We did everything to ensure that was the case. The employers determined not to use them, and they did that for a number of reasons. So if I look at LNER, for example, they looked at safety measures with regards to their staff and whether their staff would be in a position to come into work and actually work those shifts. And then if they didn't, because effectively you need 60% of the staff to operate the 40% service of the minimum service. And of course, if the staff are not in, then it means that that can have safety issues with regards to passengers that are expecting a minimum service. They also looked at the impact on the passenger, not just on strike day, but the weeks to come. So you'll be aware that when LNER, there was talk of them using work notices, ASLEF responded by putting on further strikes. So there was a concern that if there were additional strikes, then the passenger would lose out. Also, if there was what's called action short of a strike or refusal to train new train drivers up or to work on the design of a new train, then again the passenger would be impacted in the longer term. So they took that into account as well.
But isn't that a problem in itself then, if ASLEF are basically, and it was reported as well that they threaten further strike action if LNER put in a work notice? Doesn't that completely contradict what we're trying to achieve? Because this could happen to every TOC whenever they want to put a work notice in to retain the minimum service that we want to see.
So effectively it well defines why we're in this dispute in the first place and why we therefore have got the minimum service levels as a tool which employers can use. And it is their choice, it's not for government. It would not be appropriate at all for government to try and force that. The government is not allowed to do that, even if the government is a shareholder. It's for the employer. It's the employer that has the legal duty to determine whether minimum service levels should be used and also to be responsible for health and safety matters as well. But the very reason why we've got this dispute is because we are in a situation where there are too many sort of voluntary requirements on workforce in order for the train operators to be able to deliver services. If we could reform in the way that I described, firstly, that would be the end of the strike because we'd have the reform. But you wouldn't be in a position whereby train operators, for example, Southeastern, about 9% of their service, their timetable would go if they didn't have an overtime agreement in place. And of course, if the unions are saying we will end the overtime agreement if you put a minimum service level in place, then that would make it worse for the passenger. But I don't want to be in a situation where we're always reliant on overtime to be able to operate 9% of a service.
But we're in a catch-22 situation with the legislation that we brought forward then, because I mean, if they are constantly being threatened with further industrial action when they want to put these work notices in place, then they're just not going to do it. So what's the point in the legislation that we brought forward?
Well, so the legislation is there for employers, if they determine it, to utilise minimum service levels, then we'd be very upfront in the way that we would like to see minimum service levels operate. But I also respect that the legislation, right at the heart of it, states that it's for the employer to make the determination, and the government isn't the employer. So our job is to do everything we can to ensure that they can be utilised. The decision as to whether they are utilised is one for the employer, and to date they have determined not to. But that doesn't mean they won't in the future, but they haven't up to now.
But they're not likely to if they're going to see further industrial action.
Well, if they continue to view it in that same way, then we'll end up with those same decisions. But as I say, that's a matter for them. But as I say, it rather shines a light on where we are right now, which is a situation where too much reliance is placed on a sort of working relationship, a voluntary agreement to be able to work in a manner where management find that very difficult because they can't utilise the workforce where they want them. And that's why we've got a dispute, and that's why the dispute is still there, because reform of the railways, in my view, is the prize that the passenger needs to succeed.
So if train operating companies aren't willing to use work notices and we want to see minimum service levels, what is the government doing to make sure that those minimum service levels are in place when the train operating companies aren't going to use that and are not?
So the way the legislation works, it's really important to be clear on this. The legislation works so that it's the employer that makes the determination, not the government. So the legislation has been brought forward for the employer to make that choice. The government's role is to make sure that the industry is prepared and able to utilise them, which includes bringing Network Rail to the fore so that the timetable, which is a 40% timetable, can be operated. The decision itself is for the employer. If the government tried to lean in that particular way, particularly where matters such as safety are being raised, then that would place the government or individuals, and that would include myself, the Secretary of State, in a legal position where we would then be responsible for the safe operation of a railway. And legally that's not a power we have, and nor should it be a power that we have. That should be down to the employer. So there's nothing that the government can actually do to force employers to utilise minimum service levels. We can only prepare and then actually sort of put it to them to make that determination, which is exactly what happened.
Gavin.
Thanks, Chair. As we've looked at this, do you not agree that operators have looked at the legislation as it stands on the one hand, and the bigger picture, including current and future relations with unions, its workforce, indeed many of its passengers who support the workers in their action on the other, and think it's just not worth issuing work notices?
Yes, hopefully I recognise that when I respond to Ms. Brickley. They look at it not just on the day itself and 40% delivery, but the impact on the passenger if the unions decide to take revenge in that sense. And there were already signs that they were looking to do that by adding the number of strikes on, talking about refusing to train new drivers up, prepare for the timetable, etc. All of that would make for a worse service in the future.
Well, it's about trying to improve relations with unions rather than make them worse, which is what issuing work notices will ultimately do. And I suppose that leads me on to, the Scottish Government are not alone. Others have said they will never issue work notices. But do you not think a much more grown-up and productive relationship between the government, the operators, Network Rail and the unions is what's called for, rather than the pugilistic, confrontational nature we've seen down here, which has led to this legislation? Obviously, we've had no strikes in Scotland.
So, firstly, I dispute the way.
I thought you might.
Well, I do, because I just described how I was able to have a very good working relationship with Mick Lynch, and we have a settlement there.
Sorry to interrupt, Minister. Just to be clear, I'm not necessarily just talking about you personally, because obviously there have been improvements in many ways since you've come into role, but in general terms, and obviously this legislation has been brought forward, that's the direction I'm talking about.
Yeah, so look, I accept the point that this industrial action, if we look at ASLEF, has been going on for far too long, and I also accept the point that it's become clear that the money that's been put, whilst I believe it's incredibly generous, it's £5,000 on top of £60,000, but it's not being accepted. And so therefore we've got to get to a position where we can get the industrial action to come to an end, because attempts to actually negotiate through it by the employers or the representatives, the RTG and ASLEF, have not reached fruition. So I would like to see more effort being made to get the industrial action taken down. Then we don't need the minimum service levels in the first place. But what I also desperately want to see, and again, I have no sort of political bias as far as this is concerned. I've never been one that sort of tried to sort of bash unions. Unions are there to do the best job for their members, but there is a tension at the moment between what may be best for the members and what's best for the passenger, because we can't allow employers to roster their limited resources in the most efficient way. So it's got to be for the benefit of the unions, certainly the passenger and the government, for this all to come to an end and for us to be able to grow passenger numbers rather than reduce it. So yeah, anything we can do that goes towards the culture that I just mentioned, then I'm keen to vest myself in it.
Yeah, I suppose just to conclude on this, the looks of it though, certainly from a rail perspective, given what we're talking about, the legislation isn't really worth the vellum it's written on, is it?
So the legislation is written in a manner that states that the employer makes the determination. And as I've said, the employer is not the government, and the government mustn't put itself in that position of trying to be the employer. We put ourselves in the position of, as a department, of doing everything we can to allow the employers to use minimum service levels if they believe that's best for the passenger, and they have taken the decision, for the reasons we've discussed, that they didn't believe that would be. So I'll leave you to your conclusions on it, but that was our role, and I believe we've executed it. It was we put the regulations out as the Department for Rail. The specification that it must be for the employer to make the determination was obviously not from our department. It was the department that brought forward the legislation as the framework.
Except I wasn't expecting agreement on that point, Chair.
Thank you, Gavin. Now, we've touched on some operator-specific rolling stock issues, but Graham and Jack, I think, want now to come in on the subject more generally. Graham.
Thanks, Chair. We've had a number of exchanges, Minister, on this issue, and the committee and individual members have been quite active in trying to secure orders and bridge this hiatus in the order book for the rolling stock companies. But I wonder if you could tell us, in November of last year, the Secretary of State came to the committee and he said the government would publish a roadmap for procurement by the end of the year. We're now almost into March. The committee's aware that, Minister, you wrote in January to the train manufacturers. Does that letter from earlier in the year constitute a roadmap?
Mr. Morris, I'm not doing this for a reason, but yesterday I played football and I've got terrible cramp. Do you mind if I hand over to Mr. Bailey? I shouldn't be doing it at the age of 50, but my leg feels like it's being amputated by the muscles within it. So, could you just excuse me a second?
Could you tell us?
Sorry, Conrad. For a moment. The rolling stock is not creaking as badly as my leg.
Well, it's a shame because I was just getting to my peroration there, but I shall ask Mr. Bailey.
So, as you rightly said, the Minister wrote to the rolling stock companies and manufacturers on the 31st of January, and we've published that very openly on gov.uk. So that does set out our forward plans around rolling stock. I'm sure if the Minister was here, and I suspect the Secretary of State said this when he appeared before you in November, the very important thing about this forward plan is it's something that we've agreed very much across government, going to some of the questions that Mr. Smith asked us earlier about Chiltern. And so it does set out that forward plan. Alongside that, we've been working extremely closely with the rolling stock manufacturers exactly to look at those gaps in the order pipeline. And obviously some have got the gaps all different, but we are working very hard with them not only to look at UK opportunities, but also to look at opportunities for us to support them in export markets.
We had the Chief Exec from Alstom giving evidence to the committee last year, and he was at pains to point out the urgency of the situation. And he also pointed out quite legitimately, I thought, that in terms of demand for new rolling stock, after Germany, the UK has the second highest demand. It's just that there's a gap in the order books, and tens of thousands of jobs, highly skilled jobs, engineers and design engineers are dependent on bridging that gap. So the committee is very keen to push you and the Minister on this issue. I might say my recent experience, Chairman, of travelling on Trans-Pennine Express, when LNER is being disrupted because of the signalling and engineering works, and East Midlands Railway and Cross Country, I think they're all desperately in need of new trains. So if you could accelerate those orders, I think that would be very well received.
So we are working very hard, not only with the rolling stock manufacturers, but also the operators and the rolling stock companies, the Roscoes, to identify how we can work with those companies, where there may be opportunities for them to fill gaps in their order books, whether that's through new procurements, refurbishment activity, which can often also help, but also through exports. And obviously we can provide UK export finance and the like.
That brings me on very nicely to my question about the Roscoes, because according to recent press reports, and indeed according to the ORR, who gave evidence to the committee quite recently, the rolling stock companies paid out a total of £409.7 million to shareholders. and profit margins, which you mentioned for the train operating companies, were capped at 2%. For the Roscoes, the profit margins last year rose to 41.6%. I think that's quite eye-watering, especially when you, in view of your earlier statement, when we were talking about the maintenance of assets and the improvements of routine maintenance, about improving reliability, efficiency and better taxpayer value. Do we think that taking £409 million out of the system represents good value for money for the taxpayer? Do you think that?
So the current structure we have for rolling stock in the UK is a leasing structure. We don't have.
It's crazy though, isn't it?
We don't have a direct relationship with the Roscoes in that way. That's done through the operators. Clearly, when we're working with the operators to procure new rolling stock, we both look at the best value way to do that for the taxpayer, and we also work extremely hard to make sure they can drive robust commercial decisions. I think the figures you are talking about there in part relate to the fact that a number of the Roscoes did not take dividends out of their businesses for the period of the pandemic. So I think that does have a particular effect on those figures.
I'd like to explore this further. We haven't got time today, but I've given the Minister advance notice of an adjournment debate. But just for my information, I would like to understand how it works, because clearly there's downward pressure in relation to staff costs, manpower, terms and conditions. It doesn't seem to, and there's a cap or a limit on the train operating companies, although they guaranteed profits, they're guaranteed payments, but that doesn't seem to apply to the Roscoes. My information, I'm just reading from the Guardian report from 2 weeks ago. The cost of leasing rolling stock is 30% higher than 5 years ago, a period when overall rail industry staff costs remained static. 10 years ago, leasing rolling stock accounted for 13% of train operating companies' costs, and now it accounts for almost a quarter. Are we, sorry, not me, is someone being less than assiduous in applying pressure to the Roscoes in terms of their profits and how much money they're taking out of the system?
So those figures that you refer to there will relate to a large extent to the degree in which our rolling stock has been modernised in that period, and we've seen new rolling stock come onto the system. So you're not really comparing, that data doesn't compare like with like. We're talking about considerably more newer rolling stock, which of course you would expect to pay more for than older, cheaper.
With all due
stock.
respect, Mr. Bailey, with all due respect, what was the figure? £409 million. That's an awful lot of money to take out of the system. And in percentage terms, 41% seems like a huge level of profit.
So the figures I was talking about were the figures are in terms of the increase in expenditure on rolling stock over the last decade. I think it was the figures you were quoting, and that, as I say, is to a large extent down to the fact that there have been additional trains bought, and the trains that are currently, the age of trains on our network is much younger than it was a decade ago.
I must just travel on the old ones then. I'm sorry, Chair, I'll explore this elsewhere.
Right, we look forward to the adjournment debate and welcome back to our refurbished Minister.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, Chair. The Conrad's right, the average age of our rolling stock is just under 17 years now, but the age of my leg is 50 years old, which makes it the pacer of my body in that sense.
Right. Jack, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. And further on rolling stock, I just wanted to ask you about the Voyager Class 221 replacement on Vanity West Coast, and obviously there's plans for this to be replaced by the Hitachi AT300s, but there are concerns about whether this is actually being properly specified. Obviously this new rolling stock doesn't actually tilt, so is it going to be able to perform to the levels that are needed to match what the Voyager can do at the moment?
Perhaps I'll let Conrad carry on rolling stock.
So this is a question we've looked at as you'd imagine, in great detail. And it's certainly true that the new rolling stock doesn't tilt, which has a number of performance impacts in terms of the speed it can go round bends. But what it does do is have a faster acceleration in and out of stations. So actually our assessment when we took this through the assessments and the decisions some years ago was that actually overall this was a sensible procurement that delivered good value for the taxpayer and users.
Mm-hmm. And has it been considered if there are going to be any impacts on the timetable of those trains not being able to go as fast round bends?
So we will always need to look when you introduce any new train at whether there are specific timetable implications, but I'm not aware of significant changes as a consequence of this.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of, I obviously tabled a written question about this, Minister, as well, and you, in your response, particularly suggested that Network Rail are currently upgrading some of the infrastructure on parts of the West Coast Main Line to allow higher speed running of with non-tilting trains. Could you detail what are those upgrades that are actually taking place?
I think the first assessment actually is kind of which parts of the network can you run at the enhanced permitted speed without tilt, because although it was put in actually at the point where the pendolinos were introduced and therefore assumed to be tilting, it's not the case that every metre of it requires the ability to tilt. I think broadly the track geometry is fit. The real question is actually a risk assessment around things like the stability of hot drinks and the like on tables. So that's what you get into, and that's the work that's being done.
Window, do we really?
Indeed. But that's the limiting factor, and that's but it's not the case that every section of what is currently signed as enhanced permitted speed requires tilting rolling stock to be able to exploit it.
So when it says here in this response that Network Rail is currently upgrading infrastructure, there aren't actually any upgrades that's taking place.
Well, there are a range of upgrades taking place on the West Coast, including on things like power supply.
No, I'm talking about specifically to allow non-tilting trains, which is what you responded to in a written parliamentary question.
Why don't we just take another look at that again? We haven't got it in front of us, so we'll take a look. If I need to amend it, then I will do.
Okay. And in terms of the wider safety of this rolling stock that's operating on the West Coast, proposed to operate on the West Coast, are there any safety concerns that have now been identified since that testing has started taking place?
None that I've seen.
None that we're aware of.
Thank you.
Okay. Just want to touch briefly on some ticketing issues. In December, it was announced that the government is no longer pursuing plans to have a centralised online ticketing retailer as part of the rail reforms. Can you just talk us through why that decision was reached?
Yes, I think it was more with the sort of private sector market in mind, and a desire to try and open up market for more new entrants rather than actually having one sort of dominant centralised retailer. So that was sort of the reason why that decision was made. Anything you want to add, Conrad?
Okay. But under the proposed GBR structure, it will still be the guiding mind that will allow the private sector to come in.
Yeah, but I think that's a good example. Again, you see the legislation. There is a commitment within there to have an annual review of what the rail reform is doing for the private sector. And I think that was a good example where the view was taken that having one sort of centralised GBR ticketing sort of retailer would not be ideal for the private sector. What I would like to see is a lot more entrance into the market to actually challenge, particularly dominant retailers. And actually, I would like to encourage more of that. So the more data we can provide there, the more retailers we get, and then the better prices that are passed on. So that's more the direction of travel that we'd like to see rail reform take.
So maybe worth just saying one of the things we're doing to support that is working with the Rail Delivery Group, GBR, Transition Team and others to make sure that the existing sort of back office infrastructure is something that it's easy for new entrants to the market, or easier for new entrants to the market to plug into, so that you can get that innovation. And then the other thing we're doing is using something called the Rail Data Marketplace to set out much more sort of industry data again to sort of drive innovation in this space.
Okay, thank you. Now there's one ticketing innovation that's causing quite a lot of interest and controversy on LNER, and I think Gavin, you want to ask on that?
Thanks so much, Chair. Obviously I think we heard during the issues on the ticket office closures, we heard evidence as to how ridiculously complex and the sheer number of potential tickets and fares on the rail system in the UK. So I suppose, in principle, any simplification of that is, and trials there are to be welcomed. Obviously, ScotRail has its peak fare removal pilot, and has seen a 4% increase in passenger numbers as a result. Is there any early indication as to passenger numbers or the take-up of these new fares on LNER?
Well, the trial has just started at the
it's a
beginning
few
of the year
weeks
for
old.
2 years, so I don't know if we've got any latest data on it. We haven't, but perhaps we can get some and try and write to you. So.
It is early, to be fair, but so I wasn't sure you would.
It's so what the attempt there again is to try and do something different. But sorry, your question, and then we'll explain a bit more about it.
And again, in principle, don't mean to attempt at simplification, but obviously it's attracted, as the Chair alluded to, criticism for an apparent reduction in flexibility and an increase, in a substantial increase in some fares, particularly on the day of travel. I think the one quoted, if you get some of the cheapest available tickets on the day of travel from Edinburgh to King's Cross, that price has increased from £87 to £193. Now obviously that's well over double the current price. So obviously, given those criticisms which have been levelled by a number of people in passenger groups, have you given any consideration to potentially altering the trial midway through the trial, or are you going to wait to the end of the trial to collate the results?
So, of course, we will, via LNER, look at it with interest, and we are interested in this. But this comes to the very sort of nub of ticketing and fare reform. So simplification also means taking certain tickets out of the system. Mm-hmm. That means taking tickets that may be more expensive and replace them with cheaper tickets, but it can go the other way as well. We see that on pay as you go. And of course what we tend to see are just the cases where people are needed to pay more rather than actually paying less. So what we've got now is a situation where you can still buy your any time. You can turn up. They tend to be the more expensive. You can buy your advanced, where it's fixed for a certain time. But this is a new semi-flex ticket, so you've got the availability 70 minutes before and after. You can swap your ticket over, but the aim here is that where we've got certain services that are particularly busy, because the passenger is utilising those, and other services where you haven't got enough passengers on there, we're just trying to thin out the service, not least because we then give a more comfortable ride for everyone. But it's probably worth noticing that 55% of the semi-flex tickets are going to be better value in terms of price than the off-peak that they're replacing. So there are sort of and there are other sort of caps and sort of ticket sort of availability proportions put into the system. So it's not just like airlines where, effectively an algorithm just sort of dictates. We have actually got those safety measures in place. So I believe ultimately that they will end up being an interesting exercise to work out if we can spread the load across the service day as a whole and use that basis. And it also gives people that extra flexibility of being able to book 70 minutes before or after, which they wouldn't actually have sort of if they'd fixed their price. Or the only way they get that is if they paid the full walk-on price, which is obviously very expensive.
Sure, I think we accept that simplification might, probably inevitably lead to winners and losers initially, but obviously there's a scale of winners and losers, and obviously if a fare is going to double, you're going to drive people away from rail, and £193 for a single fare, you can fly for £30-40 potentially in some cases, so people will be less likely to go on trains potentially as a result. I see the LNER had said that they would continue to monitor and make adjustments, so that many people as possible can access the right ticket at the right price. So presumably that is live adjustments, just to go back to the question of the live adjustments rather than waiting to the end of a specified trial, or is that going to wait? Because obviously people who have complained are keen to know if there might be changes made mid-trial or waiting to the end.
But again, I just want to reassure. So, as at the end of January, there were over 300,000 new semi-flex fares priced at less than the old super off-peak fare in the booking horizon. So those offers are still available. I believe it's right that we make steps to try new things, to try and even out the service so that we haven't got services where people are crowded on, and we haven't got other services where there are too few passengers. And this is an interesting trial, and it is just a trial, to see if this type of thing will work. If it does work, we'd look to see other operators take it on board. If it works but with ripples, then we'll look to see those ripples taken out. And if it doesn't work at all, then it won't be taken forward.
I'm not challenging the aims of the trial, but at the earliest opportunity it would be quite good if you could let the committee know the results in terms of passenger numbers following with the trial, and also the revenue that has brought in, if there's potentially been an increase because of the fares or a decrease per passenger, etc., etc. But I realise
certainly we will do that, but I can tell you there are no sort of commercial sort of targets in terms of that this is supposed to raise more money. This is about trying to get more people onto the trains at sort of times where we can deliver a sort of comfortable service for all, and to use price with that regard. And I've given you the data, and I can write to the committee with even more, and to demonstrate that we're putting cheaper deals on offer, cheaper than they had been under the sort of previous ticketing regime.
Yeah, it'd be good to contrast and compare the results from peak fare removal, etc., with what LNER are doing, etc. But if I can quickly, because again time's against, just move on briefly, if I can, to the Great British Rail sale. Obviously started in 2022, and we had another sale in January this year. Have you got any kind of data there you can share with us in terms of the long-term effects of the sale in 2022, and also have you been able to measure the benefits of this year's sale? Any data on that?
It's in my head, but I can't get it out. Conrad will, but I know that it's not sold as many this time as it did last time. I don't know whether we've got reasons for that. Previously, where it sold over 1 million, I think 70,000 of the tickets were to people that had previously not been using the rail. So we regard that one as a great success. This one has been successful, but I believe it's just over 500,000.
Yeah, so numbers for this time round that we've collated at this point are 4.8 million in savings for passengers and around 650,000 tickets sold. And I think we're still obviously analysing why that number is fewer than the first Great British Rail sale, but my strong suspicion would be that would be heavily driven by the fact that we had significant industrial action for a week of the rail sale period. So I suspect that will have had an effect.
And on the long-term aspect of it, in terms of the 2022 sale, have you know kind of work out, or the surveys in terms of this? I think you said 70,000 folk who don't usually use rail who bought tickets in that sale. How many of them have continued to be rail passengers as a result, or were they just one-off using the cheap tickets?
I don't think we have that. We have that data.
I would suggest it may be worthwhile pursuing that.
Well, it would be very useful to have it, but I don't think we have it at this point.
Okay. We will write to you, because is it 70,000 from last time?
I haven't got
I'm pretty sure it is, but let us write just to make sure you've got the correct data. Okay. I'm sure the figure was 70,000 that were new to rail, but your point's an interesting one in terms of can we actually follow their story. So let us see what we can find.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Gavin. Now, for the final section of this session, it won't surprise you that a number of colleagues want to ask questions on HS2. So, Greg, Jack, and Gavin have caught my eye on that. So, Greg, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Indeed, it would not be a session of the Transport Select Committee without me having a pop at HS2. We had Sir John Thompson before us earlier in the year. He casually threw in another 10 billion quid for phase one. Do you agree with the costings that he outlined, the projected costings that he outlined for phase one at a previous select committee session? And how is the department actually working with HS2 Limited to finally somehow get to a point where the nation can understand how much this thing is going to actually cost?
So the last parliamentary report made it clear that there was a differential between our view on the costs and the HS2 view on the costs. So we were quite transparent before government in terms of publicising that. And the reason for that is twofold. Firstly, the HS2 figure didn't take into account the changes at Euston, which is now to be privately financed, and also didn't take into account the expectation we have as a department that the civils contracts need to be, we're looking for HS2 to enter into a restructuring of those contracts with the industry to provide better pricing and better incentives, but also better value to the taxpayer. And it didn't take into account of that particular part. So our cost estimate is lower, and we reported it on that basis as well. I do understand the natural tension. Quite rightly, as a department, we should always be pushing HS2 and the contractors to deliver at the best price. HS2 will perhaps always want to add in other factors so that they don't feel that their pricing is changing. So there's bound to be that buffer. But our job is to continue to challenge them in terms of culture and delivery for better value. And that's what we're currently doing.
So what is your current view on the cost in real money, not 2019 numbers, because we've all seen inflation since then, of the cost of Phase 1 as it currently sits, not central London to not quite central Birmingham?
So just in terms of the cost, so HS2 have reported Phase 1 is between 49 billion and 57 billion in 2019 prices. Obviously that exceeds the funding envelope, which is agreed with us at 44.6 billion. We actually find that with our bandwidth, the sort of lowest part for that is at the 45 billion pounds. So we believe that at that lower part, we're still at the funding envelope. I recognise there is that differential between what we view the cost to be and what HS2 believe the cost to be. And those are the conversations we are having with them right now. It also takes some work around with regards to sort of Euston and other aspects. So that comes into the price. But we're more ambitious in terms of the pricing envelope, and our report has made that quite clear. We're, of course, still on 2019 pricing because that's what we tend to price at from a spending review perspective. I'm fortunate that I have the Professor of Northern Rail, Nick Bisson, with me, who may want to also add.
The only thing I'd add was that the cost ranges just quoted, the 49 to 57 and the 45 to 54, are for the historic scope of Phase 1 before any of the changes from Network North. So there is something to come out of those for the scope changes. There is also pressure for some of the latest prolongation reflecting fiscal constraints that have therefore meant the programme is spread longer over time. All of that is currently being worked through and will be included in future reports to Parliament when ready.
Okay, I appreciate that. Can I quickly move on to, Minister, you mentioned challenging HS2 on behaviour and the way they go about building this railway. It has been clear in Buckinghamshire that the tunnelling machine has left some sinkholes in its wake. The first one last year, followed by a second one, and then a couple of weeks ago, two more appeared. Actually, more disturbingly, significantly after the boring machine had passed under those particular bits of land. There's been very poor communication to Buckinghamshire residents, particularly those in that area, as to what the safety risks are ongoing. Because I think there's a big difference between a sinkhole appearing as the boring machine goes underneath and a sinkhole appearing weeks after the boring machine has gone underneath. So what action is the department taking to ensure, one, all the ground above the tunnels is safe and secure and isn't suddenly going to collapse under people's feet, or more likely sheep's feet? And what is being done to improve communication with people that actually live in and around that area as to what on earth is going on with these sinkholes?
So I apologise if the feeling was the communication was good enough. Nick may have the papers in front. So from my perspective, there are obviously there were another two sinkholes that were not as large in their scale as the previous two that you mentioned. One was linked to some work that took place on the front of the tunnel boring machine, so we know that was directly the sort of cause aspect to it. And the other was with an unknown geological fault that was then realised once that had taken place. Both the occurrences where the sinkholes were produced were on DFT-owned land. Align, who were the contractors, conversed with Buckinghamshire Council, and I am told they were satisfied with the sort of response and what had taken place. But of course I would look again, and I'll certainly look in terms of the communication to reassure. One of the tunnel boring machines, I can't remember the name of her, has just sort of made the sort of breakthrough, and that happened yesterday, and the other one is due to in a couple of weeks' time, so that will sort of complete that section of tunnel boring, and it's obviously the boring that is causing, or has been causing, these 4 sinkholes to occur. Is there anything else you want to add, or is that correct?
Can I just pick up, and this will be my last point on this. Yes, you're right, the first boring machine came through, a little bit tone deaf of HS2 to celebrate that with fireworks in the middle of a community that's blighted for in excess of a decade by this thing. But leaving that to one side, I really want to press either you, Minister, or your officials on this point of sinkholes appearing after, at the moment a couple of weeks after, but who knows what will happen in the future, the boring machines have long gone. What is being put in place for the long term, that let's say another sinkhole appears in the Chilterns in a year, or 5 years, or 10 years, after all the contractors have gone and moved on to some other project somewhere, or whatever they're going to do, what's being put in place for protections for those communities in Buckinghamshire that could well find themselves through these geological faults that are being discovered with massive holes in the ground?
I think what may be best if we write and actually make the case that these sinkholes have occurred as the machines have gone through, and that's caused that particular part, and why the evidence is there that would demonstrate that you shouldn't see sinkholes occur after that sort of pass-through has occurred. I think it's best if we actually give you the sort of written evidence to give you that assurance. I'm sorry if you felt that the sort of celebration was misplaced. I wasn't able to go there myself because I was tied up yesterday morning, so I wasn't aware that there were fireworks. What I would say is that the team have worked incredibly hard, and I've been down there on those machines as they're going through, and have worked really hard, and are obviously really pleased that they've managed to deliver that breakthrough. It's an enormous engineering feat, but I'm sorry if that caused a disturbance as they were sort of celebrating their success.
Okay, thank you.
Jack. Thank you, Chair. And I've got a few questions, but firstly I wanted to ask about road safety audits, and obviously you're aware we've been asking a number of questions now about the road safety audit process. We've not had satisfactory answers still to some of the questions that we've asked, and this week we've written again to HS2 Limited, this committee have, to ask for them to release evidence that the road safety audit process has been carried out properly by HS2 Limited. So will you, Minister, request that HS2 Limited release all of the documentary evidence that we as a committee have asked for?
Well, not wishing to pass this on, but I know that you were given an assurance from Sir John Thompson that he would meet with you to discuss this, and he is very willing to do that, and then you can obviously discuss what documentation needs to be released. But my understanding is that those roads still require the same planning consent of a local authority. HS2, I know there's a feeling it's marking its own homework, but obviously it's the contractors that deliver those projects. HS2 is...
This is not about the planning process. This is about whether these roads have been constructed within and planned within UK British standards, and that is the concern, that safety standards have not been properly followed, and proper safety standards are that HS2 should not be marking their own homework on what is in line with UK standards, design standards, is that either National Highways, in the case of the strategic network, or local councils, in the case of the local network, should be the overseeing organisation.
So
there
my
are
understanding
concerns
is
that has not happened properly.
Okay, so my understanding is HS2 are accredited to make that determination, and that they don't believe they're marking their own homework. They actually believe as that accredited body, they're auditing the work of the contractors. But so therefore they feel that everything is in order. The reason I mentioned the planning side is just for completeness, to demonstrate that there is also a local authority planning requirement for those roads in the first place.
This would not be a material consideration in terms of a planning process. This is about the safety and design standards of these roads and whether those conditions have been properly adhered to.
And as I say, it's right that HS2 and Sir John, I believe the offer is with you to meet with him. He will be able to take you through reasons as to why, A, they believe they have the power to make that determination, and B, that their determinations are correct. But it comes down to the evidence, which is why I think that's something that you should take up with him. Our understanding is that they do have those powers and that they are properly utilised.
So you're saying that HS2 Limited have the power to go over and above what are widely accepted UK design standards?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that they're an accredited body to make a determination. In terms of actually how they've made that determination and ensuring it complies, that's something that needs to be looked at as a case study with Sir John, and he's very willing to do that with you.
Right, okay, well, I'm a bit dubious about that because I think we've asked for some very clear evidence of what we want to supply, and that has not been forthcoming, so I'm not sure whether a meeting will release that, but I will obviously
I will make this commitment that we will ensure that you've got documentary evidence that demonstrates that they are meeting those standards. That should not be an issue, Mr. Brereton, but if it appears it is, then we will make sure that that part's rectified. Anything you want to add, Nick?
In terms of moving on to rolling stock, and obviously there have been numerous questions about the rolling stock for HS2, and particularly obviously tilting technology, issues with numbers of doors, but also most recently concerns have been raised with me about actually the new rolling stock may not be able to carry as many passengers as existing Pendolino rolling stock would be able to. So why is it that, given the changes that have been made, the cancellation of phase 2, why is it that the government have decided to proceed with the contract for rolling stock without any changes?
Well, so the rolling stock contract was for phase 1, and obviously phase 1 continues. But of course, as we look for that rolling stock to actually go beyond, then we will be looking at the right design for the rolling stock in terms of its length. For example, and you're right, the Pendolino length is, I think, 264 metres, and the rolling stock for HS2 is 200 metres. Nick can talk a bit more about this because he appeared before the Public Accounts Committee and addressed the same thing in terms of some of our options. But it's right to say to the committee that we haven't locked anything down because we're actually still looking at the service, and therefore that actually requires us to look at the sort of service capabilities in terms of the rolling stock.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I'd add is that within that evaluation of overall capacity and the use of 200 and 400 metre units, it remains our intention to look at options that would allow 400 metre units to run further, for example, to Crewe.
Right, and in terms of potential future rolling stock, is there an option to change that contract if it is found that it isn't what we need for the new services that we're going to run on the HS2 network?
I think at the moment we are proceeding on the basis that is set out, and I think we feel there are ways of making that work. But we will set that out when we do the.
But are there any mechanisms if it was then decided in 2 years' time, in 3 years' time, that we need to actually change this? Is there a mechanism to do so?
So there's the sort of legal and the practical. So the entire design of HS2, in terms of how our stations will be looking, platforms, etc., are on the basis that you're looking at a sort of 200 metre. Now, going further north of Birmingham, so Nick makes a point about 400 metre trains. That's something that would require quite a lot of development at Crewe, but it's possible if we decided to then have 400 metre trains go to Crewe and then to actually split up Liverpool-Manchester, say. So we're looking at all of those parts, but it's important to note Well, I had this discussion recently because a colleague of ours was bringing a proposal where Silverstone were interested in having a halt terminal, but it's not as straightforward as many would think, because the design has already been put in place for the service to look and appear in a certain way. And so therefore to change specification can sometimes mean you're changing the design of the railway that's already been set
Is
out.
any consideration being given about using existing Pendolino rolling stock on? Because that was initially one of the proposals, to use that on the new network.
That's not a current proposition, partly because you won't get the journey time savings, but also because running a mix, a significant variation in the speed mix on the London to Birmingham section will affect capacity.
Do you mean running the Pendolinos between London and Birmingham?
No,
That's
beyond
what
Birmingham.
Right.
There would be no benefits to running.
No, I did. Well, because obviously that line will continue, but I just sorry.
Okay. In terms of the Handsacre link, I wanted to ask a few more questions about this, because obviously John Thompson made quite an error in had to correct what he'd said about the future use of the Handsacre link, but we've still not got to the bottom of the question about why HS2 Limited changed their original proposals to connect onto the fast lines of the West Coast Main Line. They changed these proposals to connect onto the slow lines. We do not still understand why this actually happened. So have we got any answers of why that actually was changed?
So the why that happened was at the point where the government at the day had taken a decision to bring forward phase 2A with an early delivery date. And what that meant was that Handsacre Junction, which had originally been specified for 7 HS2 trains an hour, was only going to be used in that way for a very short period before 2A opened. That's the kind of history as to why the Handsacre design got changed in the first place. It was to realise the opportunity of an efficiency saving for something that was not going to be used.
But
ultimately,
how could it be more cost efficient to build a longer viaduct to connect onto the slow lines?
So the engineering that was done at the time said there was a cost saving to be had out of that and a reduction in disruption. I think as we look forward, if I come on to the sort of forward-looking piece, within Network North, an allowance of £500 million was made to look at the connection at Handsacre and indeed works down the West Coast. I actually think the words fast and slow lines are perhaps not as helpful as they might be here, because this all comes down to a two-track railway through Shugborough. The question is, are you joining the outside lines of the West Coast or the inside lines? And at the moment there is a design that joins the outside. That will be less disruptive to the West Coast to construct. And I think our emerging view is that that is probably good enough if you then move the freight onto the central lines before it gets there. And those are the sort of issues that we're working through with Network Rail at the moment. But that's why we don't necessarily see the need to go back to the original design, which would have been more disruptive to the current West Coast to build.
So when are you looking to sort of conclude the design of that? Because obviously you're going through these proposals now to look at what might be the alternative.
This year.
Right, okay. In terms of the issues that we're having with land, obviously on phase 2, I just wanted to ask you also again about the issues that we still have with compounds, because we have got, particularly throughout Staffordshire, we've got a number of compounds. Some have been closed down now, some still haven't. We've still got security costs being accumulated by the taxpayer on a number of compounds. So what is actually the blocker that's stopping some of these compounds being closed down?
Well, I'd need to look at the specifics, but there are certain sort of utility works that still, if they're started, will need to be completed. And also certain environmental management deliveries which may again be concluded, because it may be better for the environment for that to actually occur. So I'd need to look at the absolute specifics, and I'm very happy to take the compound details and then let you know A, the reason why it's as is, and B, what the timescales will be for
I think it would be very helpful if you could look into this, and particularly look into how HS2 Limited is communicating with particularly those parishes and communities, because the lack of communication is a major concern. Where we do have these compounds and bits of kit that are still in place, this is a major concern for them, many of those communities, as I'm sure you can imagine.
Yeah, I do recognise that, and I'm sorry for it, and I'll take that away. And I'm also I think since I last came before you, I met with the NFU and the Farming Minister to talk about how we could expedite agricultural land that, if it's currently not being built on, it won't need to be built on because the railway won't be there, then we need to get it back to agricultural land before it becomes fallow. And makes the situation difficult for the environment. So I'm particularly committed to seeing what we can do to get that land away earlier.
Is there anything that can be done to make sure that HS2 Limited actually stick to that? Because obviously there is concerns that that this decision after a future general election might end up getting reversed in those communities. So
yeah, well, I mean, as things stand, I mean, both the Prime Minister in October and indeed the Leader of the Opposition this year went to Manchester and made it clear that HS2 would not be delivered to Manchester. So both political parties seem to have said the same thing as far as that's concerned. But I do understand the blight issue. We are tasked with making sure that we come up with a plan that releases safeguarding on the 2B and also in terms of the eastern leg for the summer. And I want to also see land which quite clearly wouldn't be within the interest to actually be kept because it's not.
So you're
it's
anticipating
not urban land. But we have to. So
you're anticipating some of those sales may happen before the.
I'd like to get those away early. So someone gave me an example in the farming community of 5 acres, which could go back to a dairy farmer. It could be farmed, and you can get food produced from it rather than actually just being sat there idle, which of course will mean effectively it rewilds itself, which is no good for anyone.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Just one quick supplementary from me on that. There is the work that's been initiated by the two mayors, Andy Burnham and Andy Street, with David Higgins, looking at alternative upgrades, new routes between West Midlands and Greater Manchester. As a department, do you have any direct involvement in that work?
So the Secretary of State and I and lead officials met with the mayors and also with David Higgins at their request so that we could assess what it was they were actually looking as a proposal. Officials have been able to give them the access that they have required, but we don't actually know what the proposals are. That's the next turn for them to come back and explain. But the Prime Minister has been clear that HS2, 2A and 2B will not go ahead. They obviously have a potential proposal that they may wish to advance, but we just don't know what it is at that particular sense. But we are trying to provide the assistance that they may need in order to do their work. But at the same time, the Prime Minister is very clear that HS2 will not be going further beyond the Midlands.
Okay. And final questions from Gavin?
I'll be fairly brief. Mr. Brereton's covered most of my question, but essentially, I mean, I've written you a letter in recent weeks about journey times on to and from Glasgow when HS2 is introduced. The committee's heard evidence which has been challenged both to the committee and on social media, but I've had also many other people in support of this idea. In fact, it's not new that journey times might be an issue following non-tilt trains being introduced. As early as 13 years ago, this issue was raised, but we had evidence that said if you don't have tilting pendolinos run up to Glasgow, so the journey time lengthens by about 20 to 24 minutes. It will be the equivalent of going to Stirling rather than Glasgow. So obviously, I haven't had a response to the letter, so I don't know what the department's formal response to this actually is. What will the journey times be from from Glasgow, or indeed Central Belt of Scotland to Edinburgh following the introduction of HS2?
They should be faster, and I'll make sure that the response you get is consistent with what Nick and I say right now. So the indicative journey savings for Birmingham are 30 minutes, for Manchester 27 minutes, and for Liverpool 26 minutes. So by that very definition, as you then proceed up, there should still be a journey saving time for Glasgow.
In fairness to the Minister, that stretch between Glasgow and Liverpool and whatnot, that's obviously a stretch of track which is perhaps going to be most compromised by the new train set compared to a Pendolino.
Yeah, so that's why we've got this £500 million, which we're looking at in terms of actually how to make the capacity and the timetable work up towards the northwest. So, as I said, the indicative levels suggest those journey savings times. As Nick has said, there are certain parts of the track where you can actually reach those higher speeds without the requirement to till. And again, I've mentioned that Silverstone example. It was interesting that just one stop on HS2 would add 8 minutes onto the journey time. So the very fact that you've got sort of faster acceleration plus you're not stopping up to Birmingham means that you've got that saving, which then part will last up to Glasgow. Nick?
Yeah, I mean, I think the journey, as the Minister says, the journey time saving between sort of London and Handsacre is of the order of 25 minutes. You will then, I think, lose some of that if you don't have a tilting train to Glasgow, but not all of it. I think the other biggest factor in what the journey time turns out to be is the stopping pattern of that train. Picking up the point about Silverstone, which I think is the extreme example, but clearly the more stops that it makes, the slower it will be. And that is something that is still under consideration as part of optimising the outputs for phase 1. But I would anticipate that we will update on that when we restate the business case later in the year.
I suppose, and to be fair, it's unlikely that you'll still be in the position of Rail Minister when these services are in operation. But can you give a cast iron guarantee, and because I'm sure you'll be beyond that level, Minister, obviously, but can you give a cast iron guarantee that not just say 1 or 2 services a day that maybe express and miss out some stations to the point that Nick made, the majority of services from Glasgow to London will be faster than they are now? Can you give a cast iron guarantee that will be the case?
So, again, in a way you've answered your own, because I'm not the type of person that if I'm not going to be here I'll just say anything. That's the sort of worst type of politician. Well, what I can say is that we are planning on the basis that the journey time should be quicker to Glasgow in the way that we deliver this. And let me put it another way, we'll do everything within the department to make sure that is the case, because it's important that whilst it's not necessarily a Scottish project, but the benefits are there for Scottish travellers and English travellers going to Scotland as well. So we design it on that basis that saving time will be there, because we believe it's important for Scotland as well as for the success of it in England and Wales.
That brings us to the conclusion of today's session. Can I thank all three of you very much indeed for your time and answering our questions. I hope the Minister's leg or ankle, whatever was causing problems, is
I'll limp on.
Fully restored. But again, thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to the issues that you've undertaken to write to us on and receiving that information. Order.
Ended. The proceeding has 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 ended.